So there's stories coming out from the Professional Footballers Association about UEFA wanting to implement a salary cap across leagues in Europe. The current talk is for a cap on transfers and wages at 70% of a club's revenue. So from my point of view, I can get the article up and read more of it if we want, or share it on the screen, but I don't really want to because of the ads and stuff on the side of it. But basically, the PFA is saying that they want to do it. The UEFA president, Alexander Sefran, is saying that big and small clubs agree that limiting the earning potential of players is the best way forward. That grabbed to me straight away is what sets alarm bells off, because it's technically a restraint of trade. And how did the Bosman transfers come in the first place? Because of a restraint of trade. So if you've got someone like Messi who could be earning 700,000-800,000 to a year or whatever, and a week, not a year, and you can only pay him a maximum, and he's at a club where he can only earn like a maximum of like 70,000 a week. I get it. That's still a shitload of money, but it's still like, for me, I just don't really. I think it's going to be a royal shit fight in the courts if it does happen. But they're just going through talking about it here. They're looking at it like in England and Wales. PFA's got more than 5,000 members. They think they're going to create a real problem if they treat players like this. Now, what they're saying in 2021, it succeeded in the challenge of an independent panel to have squad salary caps of $2.5 million and 1.5 million in Leagues 1 and Leagues 2 withdrawn. So they've already tried this in the lower leagues in England, and the PFA's already put that on the kibosh in courts. So what I was going to say here is, so what Sefran was saying is that for now we have the new rules after 2024 that you can spend up to 70% of your revenues for salaries and transfers, but that's not enough limiting enough, because if your revenues are 5 billion, 70% of that is quite a lot. It's not about the owners, it's about the value of the competition, because if 5 clubs will always win it, then it doesn't make sense anymore. So UEFA are looking at it in terms of they only want to do this to try and improve the overall standard, not have the same 5 teams winning in every league. But then you've got the Players Association, the PFA, saying it's going to be a restraint of trade. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But why we brought this up is we was touched on a couple of weeks ago on the pod about salary caps down here in the A-League. So, Shane, I'll get you to go through what the setup is down here in the A-League with that, and then we'll just discuss it further from there. So over to you, Shane.
Yeah, so as part of the league down here, so the A-League, so our top tier, we have a salary cap league. I don't have the figure off the top of my head that we have for each season, but there was a CBA a few seasons ago that they increased that limit. And so basically, apart from a few exemptions, the clubs here, I think, have to spend 90% or get up to 90% of the available salary cap. There is a floor as well as a cap, but it's a cap league. So teams here can't just go out and sign players for the sake of it and put them on whatever wages they want. They have a cap that they have to kind of juggle with. Now, there are a few exemptions to that list as well. So the way that we work here is we have what we call marquee players, which are basically both international and also Australian marquee players that can have a wage outside of the cap if you choose, right? So to give you an example of that, my club at Melbourne Victory and Jared's club as well, Melbourne Victory, we have Chris Economides on a marquee contract. So he doesn't, because he's a marquee, he doesn't get paid within that cap. He can get paid whatever amount they want. They're kind of special positions made available for kind of anyone can be made a marquee, basically. We also have, in terms of exemptions, guest player slots as well. So if you sign a guest player, they can play half the season. Again, they were exempt from the salary cap. You can pay them whatever you want. As part of the recent CBA that was introduced a few years ago, the league also introduced what's called a designated player option, which allows you to pay certain players between, I think, 300 and 600K as their wage, but it's counted outside of the salary cap. And then the final one was a dedicated players exemption, which is basically if a player has played more than 10 seasons at one club, you can basically, their wage doesn't have to count within the cap. Which Jared and I have that. Lee Broxham, who's been at Melbourne Victory pretty much since its inception as a club, it'll be coming up to almost 20 years soon.
Should have retired 3 years ago, but anyway.
Hey, I love Broxy. I'm not going to hear a bad word about Broxy. He's on all my tops. No. Anyway, so apart from those exemptions, and we've got restrictions in terms of how many visa players we can have as well, but they all come under the cap.
Do you want me to give the figures on all of it, Shane? Because I've been able to look it up.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the figure off the top. Is it 2.5 or something?
It's 2.6 million for a team. Okay. So you got to have a squad of 25 players. 5 can be non-Australian or New Zealanders. Mm-hmm. So you got to have 20 players, and you've got to fit a bunch. Like the salary cap is 2.6 million. Now, then you can pay 2 of them as your marquee players outside the cap, and you can pay them whatever amount you want. Doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. Doesn't count on the cap. So that brings it down to 23 players with 2.6 million to play with. But then you can have 2 designated players between 300 and 600,000. So that brings it down to 21 players with 2.6 million as your salary cap. The salary cap is to be reviewed middle of next year because 5-year CBA comes up at the end of next season. So they do that. So it encourages you to develop players and bring them through. But what we also see a lot of down here is a lot of, like, you sign a player from another club and the first 3 or 4 comments will all be the recycling symbol. Because players just bounce around the clubs a lot down here.
There's another reason or difficulty too, and another bit to add some context to the situation here is that we don't have, or our league doesn't allow transfers between clubs. So let's just say that there's an Adelaide United player and Melbourne Victory is interested for him. We can't go and offer Adelaide a fee and get that approved, and he has to basically have his contract either run down or what we call getting mutual, which is mutually terminate the contract, so he can then go across to another club. And it leads to a frustrating situation as well. Now, this isn't necessarily the cap discussion, but it gives you a bit of context around sort of cap usage and holding on to players who are saying, well, I don't really want to be here. I want to be at that club. You've got to null and void my contract. Otherwise, I'm just going to sit on the bench and do nothing. So it's a little bit complex here. I think the other thing at the heart of it is a noble intention, right? Is the idea that these big clubs just can't go and pillage other little clubs and pay whatever they want for players to come in. And we're still a fledgling league, really. We're not even 20 years old. We're still trying to build the foundations of what will hopefully be a long league for a long time. So there's a very big difference to us having a salary cap as part of our league and what is being proposed in Europe. And I'm sure the other boys will comment on that in a second. I think it's a little bit, and I've thought about this throughout the day, and I probably lean on the side of, I think it's almost like trying to put the genie back in the bottle. I don't know if they can do this. I don't know how fair it is for players to all of a sudden be subjected to, not being able to be, like, if someone wants to pay you a certain amount as an employee, you're probably like, yeah, pay me whatever you want. I'll go and play, sure. Again, noble at the heart of it. I'm just not sure it can be achieved.
So off the back of that, Shane, what they've got is other rules. Clubs must spend at least 90% of 2.25 million of the salary cap on their squad. So that's one thing there. And there's also another rule where the A-League 16 to 19-year-old players, as your development players, that don't count in your match day squad, they get a minimum wage of $45,000 a year. So you go work in the coal mines and, get that in a quarter, basically, over here. So it's not good money. So going through the comments before we look at it anyway, there's RL77 is surely that can easily be solved by using EBTs. We're talking about a workaround of it. And then you've got Kev Graham here is like, The game is gone. It's time to let the rich run away and all the rest of us find our natural competitive level. Cross-border leagues, European leagues, we're too far gone to get it back now.
Yeah.
Andrew Galea, hopefully the salary cap in Australia is scrapped. Vinny, your mate Shane giving you some shit. Love it. Expiring A-League expert and correspondent Shane. Vinny does have a good point here. A-League needs relegation and promotion. So that's the next step in it. They've got to bring in that national second tier, let it settle for 3 or 4 years, in my opinion. Make sure everyone's finances are good before unleashing relegation and promotion. Kaiser is, we had a cap here. Rangers just paid players in offshore accounts. So that's a slight thing around it as well. Vinny, offshore accounts, how's Morelos paid in donuts? Kaiser's responded, he's paid in Greg's sausage rolls.
Geez, those two are riffing in the comments. Vinny woke up and chose violence this morning. Like,
it's cute as they're becoming besties. And then you've got Kaiser saying overall it sounds overcomplicated, which it is. It's way too complicated. Looking at it, it used to be so much easier. When it first came in, you had your salary cap, 2 marquees, that was it. And 5 foreigners were allowed. That was it. It was so much easier. So, you know, people try to do things the right way and stuff things around. Andrew Galea, Australia's promotion, relegation, no salary cap. Let the cream rise and the market dictate wages. Better for youth development. We're pretty much seeing that anyway. Like, you've got to pay 90% of your cap. And you've got a club like Central Coast Mariners, for instance, which is one of the best youth development clubs. Like, if I had a kid who was good enough to be breaking in the A-League, even though I'm a Victory fan, I'd probably want them to go to Central Coast and come through that academy, because at least, you know, if they're good enough, they're going to get game time.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Central Coast have done well. I mean, even though there's a salary cap, if you're offering a contract to a player and say, look, here's Melbourne Victory, here's Sydney FC, here's Central Coast, which is Gosford, you know, more than likely, you know, the player or the known player is probably going to pick Melbourne Victory or Sydney FC, initially at least. So what they've done, they've got a great manager who really values youth. They've got a great youth setup, as you said, Jared. So they've gone, right, maybe we can't do this that way, but what we can do is we can develop our own kids. And because of the lack of transfer system and also the cap, it means that teams like Victory and Sydney can't necessarily come into Central Coast and say, we're going to grab that kid, we're going to pay you this money, and we're going to take... They've basically got to... They stay at Central Coast and develop a bit longer, and they get the benefit for it. So, look, there's merits to it. There is, but it's a whole different kettle of fish when you get over to Europe.
So, Johnny, throw it to you for the lawyer side of it. Someone with some legal...
Jesus. I mean, look, overcomplicated is putting it almost simply. I'm going to be honest with you. After listening to all that, Shane, it sounds awful. I'm not a fan of that at all. It just sounds like they are they're trying to dip their toes to 2 separate pools. They're trying to like have all of these regulations to mean that all the teams have some sort of level of fairness, but then they're also creating all of these sort of exemptions to those rules, which means that, you know, it doesn't really matter anyway, because you just listed them all, and to be honest with you, I can't remember half of the bloody terms that you came up with. They all sounded like the exact same with tiny distinctions. But like if you were still Melbourne City, for example, you still have one of the biggest salaries, biggest budgets, I imagine. You're still going to go get like whatever it is, the 5 marquees or the designated or whatever you called it, and you're still going to get these ridiculous players, and they're still going to be the better team, right? That's just it just sounds like a really, really poor system. And I think Jared made a really, really good point in his intro, which was, I don't understand how it's going to make the European leagues fairer or more equal, or however you want to describe it, when you've got teams like Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, who are in the billions of revenue, and then you've got Celtic, who are in the tens of millions or hundreds of millions, right? It's 70% of a smaller budget is still going to be the same. We still have the same issue for us, which is we cannot offer a player that more money in terms of remuneration than they can get if they moved on to the Bundesliga. Look at Frimpong. That's what he did, right? He was up and coming player. We were offering him, probably offered him a really good contract, but he was just going to get more at Leverkusen, I think it was. It went. So he's just going to get more if he goes into a bigger league. So the situation is going to be the same if we have a salary cap at 70%. So I don't really understand.
Right there, John, I'll just jump in quickly. you're talking about like going to the Bundesliga. Andrew Galea has brought Adelaide produced good players consistently. Celtic should grab their young boy. If you're talking about, we've spoken about Estri before, Aaron Kunda. We've been talking him up all season, and it looks like Bayern Munich's in for him. So, if that's the case, we've seen it with our own youth at Celtic. We can't keep them if people are going to go across to the Bundesliga. So that'll rule him out. Then you still got Gauchi, the goalkeeper there we could go in for. But
it's just how free markets work. It's not something that we should be frustrated or upset about. It's where we are. I think the only way to make leagues fairer, right? And I think we've kind of discussed this before, is to somehow disperse. I wouldn't say winnings, but when teams get into the European competitions, that there is some sort of prize money that is then dispersed to the other teams in the league, right? And that doesn't have to be. If we don't think about it just in the Scottish league terms, right? If we look at like the Croatian leagues, if we look at the Dutch league, and do you know what I mean? Like, and all of the other ones that are slightly smaller, the Greek leagues, when you've got one of the bigger teams that get through to the Champions League or Europa League, right? Would it not make more sense that all of the other teams get a fee for having their big team get into that big league, right? That big competition. And then all of a sudden you're slowly bringing, as your better teams get better, they're slowly bringing up everybody else with them, rather than the top leagues just running away with the smaller ones, the top teams running away with the smaller ones. So I don't know, that seems better than I think this sounds awful. I'm so against the cap in salary. I think it just ruins it. I think you turn it into American leagues when it's, even though they don't cap leagues, but I think just the artificialness of it and the rotation of whoever wins it every year and all this stuff. Maybe I'm a bit of an old dad with this and stuff. I just want you to just leave it alone. It's good as it is. It's like, it's not perfect, but it's fine. So just leave it alone, please. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Hey, Liam,
that reaction here.
Johnny was just in your wheelhouse, talking about some sort of basic communism there, like, get out of the Champions League and then,
healthy socialism,
and give everyone else a bit of that cash everywhere else and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, hang on, that's Johnny talking, not Liam. What is this? It's rubbing off here.
Just careful there, Jared, because remember, jokes about communism aren't funny unless everybody gets them, right? Right. To look at this, right, what I would say is that if UEFA press ahead with this, and I don't think they will, because UEFA, historically, they shit themselves the minute any big club objects to anything they're going to do, right? So I don't think this is going to get beyond the planning stages. But if they actually do want to press ahead with this, they're going to have to see it through all the way to the long haul, which could be 10 to 15 years. Because what will happen is your Man City, Real Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern Munich, these teams that are essentially too big for the current setup, would just say, right, to hell with us, European League time, off we go. And UEFA would then need to have the bottle to say, okay, cheerio, off you go. And let them go and have their 10 or 15 team elite league, right? And the rest of us can get on with it. Because if you take that top 15 or whatever out of the equation, you've suddenly got probably about 30 or 40 teams, of which I would say Celtic are one of them, which suddenly are on a fairly level playing field. Could we compete consistently with Real Madrid and Bayern Munich? No. Right? Could we consistently compete with teams like Olympiacos, Ajax, PSV Eindhoven? Yes, we could. Right? And that's the sort of level that the de facto Champions League would become once all the big teams pissed off and made their own league. But what would inevitably happen is that in the fullness of time, like all TV products, it has a shelf life. And remember, if you're talking about a European Super League, that's all it is. It is a TV product. It's not a sporting competition at that point, because it's not based on sporting merit. It's based purely on who's got the biggest financial balls, right? And basically, fans are going to get tired of, for want of a better phrase, this dick showing contest between billionaires. And they're going to want some real football again. And at that point, your Real Madrids and your Manchester Cities are going to have to come back with a tail between their legs and say, UEFA are going to let us back in. And that is when UEFA could bring the teams back in on their terms and put in whatever caps they want. But that excludes the fact, which, as John has already said, this thing is legally mince. It is not going to last even the slightest bit of legal scrutiny, right? You cannot, in a free market economy, you cannot cap people's wages. As much as I would like to, right? You can't, right? You simply can't. Also, I'm quite concerned that the main difference between this and what Shane described with the Australian League, you talked about there being a minimum wage in there as well for the younger players. Now, as Jared said, it's not an adequate working man's wage, right? There are ways that people of that age could make a lot more money doing, other jobs. But it's a start. UEFA don't even mention that. And that would worry me. That, for this to work, you would have to sell it to the majority of clubs in Europe. And I think having a minimum wage as well as a maximum wage would be a lot more palatable. Because for every Messi who's suddenly going to be pissed off that he can't make any more than £500,000 a week, you're then going to have, players at English second and third division teams who are like, oh, wait a minute, I'm suddenly guaranteed 50 grand a year. I'll take that. That's the other end of the spectrum. But ultimately, caps are not the way to solve this. Rebalancing the competitions to give teams a fairer shot. Doing away with seedings would be a good start, right? I mean, every year the Champions League is basically stacked in such a way that you've got 2 good teams and 2 diddy teams in every group. That's basically, in principle, the way it is. And unfortunately, at the moment in a Champions League sense, Celtic are considered one of the diddy teams, right? And until we start winning some games in Europe, that's what we are. And that's not going to change. And I think that creates this imbalance which runs right through the whole competition. If you had a situation where it was a completely open draw, and imagine if you had, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, Juventus, and Man United are all in the same group. You say, right, 2 of those teams are going out before we get to the last 16. Suddenly the competition becomes a whole lot more interesting. And any perceived loss of TV revenue would be made up in the fact that every game in that group is box office.
Good point.
So the thing that I look at, Liam, off the back of what you're saying, is you're going to have all these teams that are used to being the big fish in the small pond sort of thing. Like your Bayerns, your Juventuses, your Atletico, Real Madrid, Barcelona, those sort of guys being the big guys, always winning. And then they suddenly get into this league where they're not even in the top 6.
Yeah.
How are their fans going to react? And that's where it's going to turn on them. The owners may want this for extra money and a pathway to make more cash themselves, but when it flips the script and they're not winning and their fans are so used to it, they're going to be demanding players get sacked, coaches get sacked, the board gets sacked. It's going to become a nightmare. And then that's where you said come back with their tail between their legs later on. It's the only way it'd work. But at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out in the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I've been very worried. Not very worried. I've been worried of recent that the owners of these sort of giant elite clubs, like the mega bucks ones, are slowly marching towards totally sterilizing football. That it just becomes something akin to like WWE. Everything's sort of like predestined, predetermined, almost false, and it's just only the big teams, only the teams with the biggest revenue get through to finals, and X, Y, Z and stuff. And it's I'm all for changing it, but I just think that these types of changes are just going to make it worse, and I'm not for it.
In fairness, I'd pay good money to watch Neymar getting choke slammed, but that's another story.